Hello everyone. Well, first of all, thanks so much for inviting me, and thanks to all of you for coming along to hear the talk today. So this area of philosophy I'm going to be talking about. It's kind of a new area for me, so I'm really grateful to have this opportunity to talk with you about this and get your feedback as well. Okay, so I'm going to begin by just talking about a couple of made-up cases that will help us to get clear about the phenomenon that I'm interested in. So to start with, charity. Frankie believes that there are many people in the world who need aid. She is a caring person who likes to help other people, and she approves of charitable organisations. She has a well-paid job which provides her with plenty of expendable income. However, Frankie doesn't donate to charity. Now, there might be people we know who we recognise in this description of Frankie. Perhaps it even applies to ourselves. Let's go on to the second one, climate change. So Lloyd believes that human-caused climate change is a genuine phenomenon and that drastic changes need to be made to avoid disastrous consequences. He's a socially minded person who's always cared about the environment. He recycles and always puts his litter in the bin. However, he doesn't change his behaviour at all in response to climate change. Again, this may be familiar when we think about people we know. It might apply to ourselves, and actually I feel a bit hypocritical for talking about this example because I'm actually off to Corfu on the weekend. But anyway, hopefully these are going to help us get clearer on the phenomenon that I'm interested in. We would expect, given Frankie and Lloyd's beliefs and desires and character traits, we would expect them to make a certain decision or a judgment or perform a certain action. So given her beliefs and desires and so on, we would have expected Frankie to give regularly and generously to charity. And given Lloyd's beliefs and desires, we would expect him to, for example, cut down on his foreign holidays. Now, I should point out before I go on that the thing I'm interested in here, it isn't acrasia. So I don't know if acrasia is a familiar term to you all, but acrasia is when you make a certain judgment or you form a certain intention about what to do, but then you don't follow through on that judgment or intention. So you might, plan to do 30 minutes exercise 5 times a week, and you have the intention to do it, but you find that you actually don't do that. You don't carry out the actions that you'd expect given your intention. That's acrasia. Now, that's not the thing I'm interested in. So I'm not interested in the relation between your decision and your judgments and your action here on the right-hand side of the slide. I'm interested in the relationship between your beliefs and desires and character traits and the decisions and judgments that you make. So the problem with Frankie, for example, isn't that she decides to give lots of money to charity, or she judges that she should and then she fails to do so. The problem is that she doesn't arrive at that decision or that judgment in the first place. Okay, so here's the plan for the rest of the talk. First of all, I'm going to jump straight in and explain my solution, which locates the problem at the level of belief. That will become clear later on. I'll then consider some possible objections, and finally, I'll look at some of the implications of my view, why I think it's an interesting view, and some of the good things that follow from it. Okay, so first of all, I'll explain my solution. So I'm going to start talking about the standard view. So on the standard view, what you believe and what seems true to you are the same thing. So, and in fact, on some definitions of beliefs just are the things that seem true to you. So what you believe is what seems true. I'm going to talk more about this idea of seeming true a bit later. But on the standard view, you can believe something and that thing seems true to you, or you don't believe it and it doesn't seem true. The seeming true and the belief go together in this way. Now, on my view, I think that's true too. So you can have beliefs which seem true, and you can not have the beliefs and they won't seem true to you, but you can also believe something when it doesn't seem true to you. And you can not believe something, but that thing can still seem true. So things can seem true to you even though you don't believe them. So on my view, there are more options. The point is that what you believe and what seems true to you can come apart in some interesting ways. And I'm going to use that distinction, the fact that we can distinguish between what we believe on the one hand and what seems true on the other, to explain the phenomenon that I've identified with Frankie and Lloyd. The two things that are important for this talk are 1 and 3. So beliefs that also seem true and beliefs that don't seem true. So that's the contrast I'm going to be looking at today, the contrast between having beliefs that do seem true to you and having beliefs that don't seem true. Okay, so I've been talking a lot about seeming true, and it's about time I explained what I mean by that. So the best way of understanding this distinction between things that seem true and things that don't seem true, and this very notion of seeming true, is I think to use some examples. So most of the things we believe also seem true to us. So I believe there's a cafe down the road. I believe it will take me 10 minutes to walk there. I believe I know the way. So all of those things, I believe them, and they also seem true. So these are beliefs that I have that also seem true. And it's fair to say that the vast majority of our beliefs, our mundane, boring, everyday beliefs, like these ones, will also seem true to us. But some of the things we believe don't seem true. And I'm hoping that these examples will help bring out that contrast between beliefs we have that do seem true and beliefs. I believe solid objects are mostly empty space. Now, I'm a physicalist, throw in that controversial statement there. So I believe that my experiences are neural processes. And I'm sorry for this example, but it does illustrate the point rather well. So I believe that we all have tiny arachnids living on our faces. Now, this is true. I found out about this relatively recently, but apparently this is true. We have these tiny arachnids living on our faces. So I believe all of these things. But none of these beliefs seem true to me. And to be honest, I'm grateful for that. When it comes to the last one, I'm glad that it doesn't seem true to me that we have tiny arachnids living on our faces. But these are all examples of beliefs I think we do genuinely have. I really do believe all 3 of these things. And yet none of these beliefs seems true. So this is the contrast I'm trying to get at. Lots of our beliefs seem true, and some of our beliefs don't seem true. Okay, so before I explain how this distinction between beliefs seeming true and beliefs not seeming true, how that can be used to explain what's going on in cases like the Frankie and the Lloyd case, I want to have a quick digression and look at another interesting phenomenon that this framework can explain. So I think it's good to have this framework where what you believe and what seems true can come apart. And I think superstitions provide an excellent example of a case where you don't have the belief, but something seems true to you regardless. So just as we can have many beliefs that don't seem true, many things can seem true to us that we don't believe. So if I knock on wood, I can avert disaster. If I use my lucky pen, I'll pass the exam. That's an example from Anna Aquino's work on superstition. So I think what's going on in these cases is that you don't believe that if you knock on wood, you can avert disaster. You don't really believe that knocking on wood has any interesting causal effects on how your life goes, but somehow, in some sense, it sort of seems true to you. Another example might be, and this is related to this picture here, imagine you're staying overnight in what is said to be a haunted hotel, and you're all alone and you hear noises in the night. Now, even though you don't believe in ghosts, it might seem true to you that there's a ghost in the corridor outside. So even though you really don't believe in ghosts, given your situation, it might come to seem true to you that there's a ghost, even though you don't believe it. Anyway, so I think we're not going to focus any more on superstitions at all, but I wanted to talk about that quickly with you now because it illustrates, the potential of this framework, this idea that we divorce belief and what seems true, that they can come apart in these interesting ways. It shows how this framework can accommodate a wide variety of seemingly illogical or irrational behaviour. Okay, so we'll put that aside for now. So, to go back to Franke and Lloyd and how this distinction that I'm talking about here can be used to explain what's going on. Now, I'm going to argue then that beliefs need to seem true. They need to seem true if they're going to play a role in our reasoning and our decision-making processes. So almost everyone will agree that what we believe plays some sort of role in our judgment formation, decision-making and action. Now, that's not entirely true. So not everybody will agree with that. There are some people, like the Churchlands, who deny the existence of mental states like belief and desire and so on. But almost everyone, I think, will agree that what we believe plays some sort of role in what we decide to do and what we judge we should do. But my claim is it's not the belief, simpliciter, that plays this role. It's the belief's seeming true. So it's not actually the belief that's doing the work here. It's the belief's seeming true that's going to play this role. So whatever role we think belief plays in our decision making, whatever job it's doing, I want to argue that it's not in fact the belief that's playing this role, it's the belief's seeming true. So to return to that picture that we had, that sort of schematic of how things work, it's not the belief with the desire and character traits that leads to our decisions, our judgments and our actions. It's beliefs which seem true, coupled with our desires and character traits, that lead to our decisions, judgments and actions. And to return to a point I made earlier, the fact that the overwhelming majority of our beliefs do seem true, I think that has perhaps made it hard to recognise the fact that it's not in fact the belief that's doing the work. It's the belief seeming true. Because most of our beliefs do seem true, we've thought of it, that it was the belief that was important. But actually, I think it's the belief seeming true that is playing that role. And the belief on its own is impeded or prevented from playing its typical role. You can probably guess how I'm going to apply this framework now to Franke and Lloyd, but I'll go through it anyway. So here's the explanation. Here's my solution, I suppose, to the problem that Franke and Lloyd present us with. So while Franke believes that there are people who need aid, this belief doesn't seem true to her. So given her own affluent lifestyle, the things she sees in her everyday life, where she lives, going to the shops, going to work, the belief that there are people who desperately need aid, that belief doesn't seem true to her. Similarly, while Lloyd really does believe that human-caused climate change is really happening, this belief doesn't seem true to him. So things seem to go along as normal in his life. He doesn't notice any particular changes as such, and so the belief, while he really does have it, he believes that all the science, so he has this belief in human-caused climate change, but that belief doesn't seem true to him. So that's my explanation of those problem cases. Cases where people don't seem to be acting in the way that logically or rationally seems to follow from their beliefs and their desires and their character traits. I think the explanation could be found in their beliefs not actually seeming true to them. It's only if the belief seems true that it can play that role in decision making and judgment formation. Okay, let's say a little bit more about what it is to seem true. I tried to explain this or get clearer on this notion by giving you some examples earlier on, but let me say a little bit more. Now, it's not, of course, the same as believing X is true. The whole point of my talk here is to argue that what we believe and what seems true can come apart, nor is it thinking X is true. So what I want to say is this. For X to seem true, X will have been accompanied by a kind of seeming true phenomenology when we acquired the belief that X and when we consciously think about X. If this phenomenology is missing, X won't seem true. So I'm not sure if you're all familiar with the term phenomenology. It's just the way things are experientially. Now, lots of philosophers have come around to the idea that there is cognitive phenomenology, so the kind of phenomenology that accompanies thinking and thought and beliefs and hopes and what have you, just as there is perceptual phenomenology, like visual phenomenology, for example. So what I'm saying here is that I think a certain proposition will seem true to you if it's accompanied by this kind of cognitive phenomenology, this seeming true phenomenology. Now, I think the phenomenology, this seeming true phenomenology, will be present, for example, when X is acquired through perception, vision or audition, or any of our perceptual capacities, when X is acquired via experience more generally, and when X is easy to understand and acquired through testimony. So if I am new to the area and I ask my neighbour, oh, where's the nearest cafe? And they say, oh, it's on the high street 5 minutes away. Now, here are situations where I think the phenomenology, this seeming true phenomenology, will be absent. When the proposition is difficult to understand and it's acquired through testimony. So perhaps that example I used of solid objects being mostly empty space, it's quite difficult to understand that, and it's acquired through testimony as well, rather than my own experience. And also the proposition appears to conflict with perception or experience. This will also lead to a lack of that seeming true phenomenology. So, if I look in the mirror, I don't see the tiny arachnids on my face, thank goodness. So that proposition that there are such creatures living on our faces, that isn't going to seem true to me. It conflicts with our own experience. Okay, so let me just say something in addition in support of my view. So imagine that Frankie travels to a location where she can see and experience the lives of people who need aid. So imagine that that's what happens. I think that her belief that there are people who need aid would now come to seem true to her. Given her perceptual experiences and her other experiences, that belief that she has that there are people who need aid will now come to seem true. And I predict that her subsequent behaviour would be different, and she'd be much more likely to give to charity in the future. Now, of course, this is a bit cheeky here, because really I'm just saying what I predict would happen. I'm not actually doing the experiments. But it seems plausible to me, and hopefully to you too, that this is what would happen. If we put Frankie in this situation, her belief that she does have, but it doesn't seem true to her, would come to seem true when placed in this different situation. The belief that people need aid would come to seem true to her, and because the belief now seems true, it would be able to play that role in the judgments that she makes and her decisions, and she would decide to give money to charity. Right, well, I've explained the solution. I hope that that's clear, what the problem was and what the solution is. And now I'm going to consider some possible objections to my view. So the first one is that I've misidentified the solution. So I've misidentified the problem. So I'm looking for a solution at the level of belief, and really the problem isn't with the agent's beliefs, it's with their desires. So this is a matter of the heart rather than the head, this objection goes. So this objection would be, look, there's nothing wrong with Frankie's beliefs. She's not missing anything relating to her belief. It's all to do with her desire. She just doesn't want to give money to charity. The desire to, buy a magazine to read on her journey home outweighs her desire to give those few pounds to charity, say. Now, my first response to this objection would be that this mechanism of having one desire outweigh another requires reflection. So it requires one to reflect on one's different desires and have one outweigh the other. Now, the problem with Frankie and Lloyd is partly that they fail to reflect. So we're looking at their sort of just everyday lives and everyday behaviour. The problem is they fail to reflect on their beliefs and desires and carry out the action that would rationally and logically follow. And so I don't think that that explaining it as one desire outweighing another is going to work for these cases. I actually think it's not very plausible. So is it really plausible to think that a normal, regular human being would actually experience the desire for a magazine outweighing their desire to, I don't know, save a child's life, for example, by donating money to provide clean water, say? I just don't think it's plausible that any regular, typical, normal human agent would have a desire like the desire for a magazine outweigh the desire to save a life. Now, of course, we think that this sometimes sort of is going on all the time, so I need to explain what I mean here. I think it would only be plausible, it's only plausible for agents to have the kind of belief that they want a magazine outweigh that belief to save a child's life if the belief that there are children without clean water to drink didn't seem true. So I think it's only if your belief that there are people who need aid doesn't seem true that you could get to a situation where the desire for a magazine outweighs the desire to save a child's life. So I think even if something is going on with the agent's desires here, it's kind of parasitic on an explanation at the level of belief. So you can only explain what's going on by talking about Frankie's desires outweighing each other if it's also true that her belief doesn't seem true to her. If her belief did seem true to her, then I don't think it would be plausible to explain her lack of charitable donations by appealing to her desire for a magazine outweighing her desire to save a child's life. So I think that objection isn't going to work. Okay, the second objection. No belief or weak belief. Okay, according to this objection, it's not that the agent possesses a belief which doesn't seem true, which is what I'm saying. The agent doesn't possess the belief in the first place. Or the agent does possess the belief, but their degree of confidence is too low for it to play its typical role in decision and action. So the problem might be not what I'm saying, that, Frankie does possess this belief, but it doesn't seem true. Someone could say, well, she doesn't possess the belief at all, and that's what's going wrong. It's not this distinction between believing and seeming true. She just doesn't possess the belief in the first place. Or she does possess the belief, but it's she hasn't got a high degree of confidence in it. That's why it doesn't play its typical role. Now, my first response would be, in many cases, such as Frankie's actually, I think this is clearly implausible. It's not possible to imagine that Frankie could live in our society without coming to know that there are in fact people who need aid. So I think in her case it's implausible to think that she doesn't have the belief. And also remember, we can ask these hypothetical agents, we can say, are there people in the world who need aid? Is climate change really happening? If Frankie and Lloyd were asked to fill out a questionnaire or asked to bet money on whether there are people who need aid and whether climate change is happening, I think they would say that they have the belief. Now, the second response is to the idea that maybe they have this belief to a low degree of confidence. I think that's not plausible in Frankie's case. I think she probably has that belief to a very high level of confidence. There's no reason why she should be sceptical about that in any way. With theoretical or scientific beliefs like Lloyd's in climate change, it might initially seem more plausible to interpret his behaviour as being a result of his only having a low degree of confidence in that belief. And indeed, when it comes to these theoretical beliefs, subjects themselves might report a lower degree of confidence in it. But actually, I don't think, this is a bit controversial, but I don't think we should take that report to be necessarily the truth. So I think that subjects might claim a lower degree of confidence because their belief doesn't seem true, even though they actually believe it. Anyway, so I think putting that aside, I think for the majority of these cases, it's not going to be a viable solution. Like I said, it's not plausible to think that Frankie has a low degree of confidence in her belief. So it's not going to be, it's easy to see it's not going to be able to accommodate that kind of example. Okay, so we'll move on. Third objection. This is a bit similar to the last one in that it argues that the agent doesn't have the belief. Frankie doesn't have that belief and Lloyd doesn't have that belief about climate change, but they have something else. So the agent has something like a belief, but it's only what Schwitzgebel calls an in-between belief, or what Price has called a half belief. Now, the idea here is that what having a belief involves is having a set of dispositions. And when you've got this set of dispositions, we can say that you've got the relevant belief. However, when you have some but not all of the relevant dispositions, you in between or half believe. And there's a couple of examples to illustrate these distinctions. So Schwitzgebel talks about a teacher who, she's a primary school teacher who sometimes talks about prime numbers to her class. It's not part of their curriculum, so she just talks casually about it, and she defines a prime number as any number that's only divisible by itself and 1. And she doesn't explain that 1 isn't a prime number. So she just sticks with her quick definition. But she does know that 1 isn't a prime number, and if she was at a maths conference, say, she would correctly define what a prime number is. So Eric Schwitzgebel wants to say, well, it's not clear whether we should ascribe the belief, on the false definition of prime numbers to this teacher or not, because in different contexts she will say different things, so she in between believes that false definition of prime numbers. And Price gives this example about children playing a game of make-believe, and they're make-believing that the rug is a bear. And he says, to start off with, they're just playing this game, they're pretending that the rug is a bear, but later on, when a child who's been playing this game is left alone in the room and there's no one else around, that child, she might end up being really frightened, and she's actually sort of frightened to go near the rug now. And Price wants to say, in a way, she half believes that the rug is a bear. Now, my response to this idea, the idea would be that, Frankie and Lloyd, it's not the case that they have beliefs that don't seem true, which is what I'm saying. It's that they have half beliefs, or they in between believe that there are people who need aid, or that climate change is happening. So my first response is just to say, again, I don't think it's plausible to attribute to Frankie in particular anything less than a full belief. So I don't think it's plausible in her case to just attribute to her a half belief. But I think this notion does a better job of trying to capture the fact that there is something strange about her beliefs. So my response in general would be, what we're provided with here is a single stable situation which is designed to capture a conflict or tension. So the person has this stable thing, a half belief or an in-between belief, and they're possessing this half belief or in-between belief across all of these different situations. They have this half belief or in-between belief, and that's supposed to capture this conflict that is arguably, present in that situation. But I think the conflict is actually better explained and better captured by my view, so my view would be that when the child is pretending that the rug is a bear, they start off believing that the rug is a rug, and they continue to believe that the rug is a rug. So even at the height of the make-believe, the pretense game, they still completely believe that the rug is the rug. But what's changed is the seeming true. So to start off with, the rug, it doesn't seem true that the rug is a bear. But because this game's been really intricate and they've been playing it a long time, it's come to seem true that the rug is a bear, even though at no time, I think, does the child believe the rug is a bear. And I think the reason my explanation is better here is because this tension, this conflict, this thing that's going on in these cases, it can be a simultaneous thing. So when the child is sort of feeling frightened and a bit nervous of going near the rug, I think that at that time the child fully believes that the rug is a rug, but it seems true to them that the rug is a bear. And saying that state of mind they're in can be captured by saying that they have an in-between belief or a half belief. I don't think that captures the state of mind of that child. I think the child fully believes that the rug is just a rug, even though it seems true to them that the rug is a bear. So that conflict is better captured by my view. And actually, some empirical studies have been done to suggest that I'm on the right track here. So when children are playing and they're pretending, say, that this round plastic pretend cookie is a cookie, and they're pretending to eat it, if the experimenter actually takes a bite out of this cookie, the child is really shocked. It suggests that at no time does the child actually believe that the pretend cookie is a cookie. And when the experimenter behaves as if they believe that, the child is really surprised, which suggests that the child doesn't even half believe that the plastic thing is a cookie. They fully believe that it's just a pretend biscuit. All right, so let's move on to the fourth objection. I think this is the objection that presents the biggest challenge to my view. The people sort of providing this objection would say that they agree with me that there's something about the agent's belief, so they think the agents do possess the belief in question. So Frankie really does believe that there are people who need aid, and Lloyd really does believe in climate change. So they agree with me that the person possesses the belief to a high degree of confidence. They really genuinely have it. But they would say that the belief isn't salient, and that's what's wrong with the belief. So I'm saying what's wrong with the belief is that it doesn't seem true. My opponent would say what's wrong with the belief is that it isn't salient. So the agent possesses the belief with a high degree of confidence, but the belief isn't salient to them. Salience is defined by, for example, Helen Yetta-Chappell as attention grabbing, or by Jessie Munton as more accessible. But I'm sure that the idea of salience is, familiar to us all. So on this view, it would be that, what explains Frankie's failure to arrive at this decision to donate money to charity isn't that she doesn't have the belief, or that she doesn't really believe it, she doesn't believe in it confidently, she has only a half belief. None of that's true. She has the full belief. However, because that belief isn't salient to her, she doesn't act in line with that belief. Another thing we might think is that really there's no difference between my view and this salience view, that seeming true and salience are basically the same thing. So that would be another sort of way of making the objection. Now, so my response will have two parts. First, I want to say seeming true isn't the same thing as salience, and I then want to say that seeming true offers a better explanation of the phenomena. So first of all, to do the first thing, to differentiate seeming true from salience, I think X can seem true without being salient. For example, that proposition we started out with, I know where the cafe is. Now, I think most of our beliefs are like this, and I think that these kind of beliefs, they do seem true, but they're not actually salient to us. So it's true that I believe that I know where the cafe is. That belief does seem true to me. However, it's not salient to me. I just take it for granted. It's not salient. And relatedly, sort of the other way around, X can be salient without seeming true. So again, this is to prove that those two notions come apart. So imagine you're watching a documentary which is explaining why solid objects are mostly empty space. That proposition, that solid objects are mostly empty space, will be very salient to you. You're focusing your whole attention on it. It's very salient, that proposition to you. However, no matter how salient it is, I don't think it will seem true to you in the way that I've tried to capture here. So although your belief is very salient, it won't seem true to you. And if things can seem true without being salient, or be salient without seeming true, then it looks like those two notions are actually. So just to give another example of something that can be salient without seeming true. So here's another case, a bit like, the Frankie and Lloyd cases that I would want to explain with my seeming true distinction. So sorry to refer to the pandemic, but at the beginning of the pandemic, you might remember that after everybody had been advised to, keep a distance from each other and to wear masks in public places, the newspapers were filled with pictures of lots of people, crowding on crowded beaches and hot days, not obeying the social distancing guidelines or wearing the masks. And a lot of people were sort of outraged about this. I'm not commenting on the issue itself, but it could be. So my explanation of this behaviour of many people who didn't go along at the beginning with the mask wearing and the social distancing, but who later then did, my explanation of that behaviour would be not that these people are, selfish or don't have a social conscience or anything. My explanation of lots of these people would be that they do believe that there's a pandemic going on. That after all, the news was full of it, but that belief doesn't seem true to them. And that would explain why they didn't, at the beginning, alter their behaviour in line with this belief that they had. Now, the salience view can't explain that situation. The salience view can't explain it because the belief that those people had, that there was a pandemic going on, that belief was very salient to them. It must have been very salient to them because, like I said, it was in the news, it was on the newspapers, it was on social media. So the belief was very salient to them, and yet, so it can't be that their belief wasn't salient, which explains why they didn't act in line with their beliefs. Now, but my view can, because I'm saying that it's because that belief didn't seem true to them that they failed to act in line with their beliefs and desires and what have you. So I think, all in all, seeming true and salience are different things, and the seeming true view can accommodate more of the phenomena than the salience view, and it offers that whole framework to accommodate other kinds of irrational or illogical behaviour as well, such as superstitions. Okay, so I've explained my solution and I've looked at some possible objections, and now, just to finish off with, I'm going to look at some of the implications of my view. Okay, so to start off with the role of belief. So it seemed obvious till now that beliefs play an important role in decision making and action. It seemed, we've just taken this for granted, it seemed so obvious that we haven't really questioned it. But if I'm right, then it's not actually the belief itself that plays this role, it's the beliefs seeming true. And I think that's an interesting outcome of this idea, that actually it wasn't ever the belief doing that work, it was the belief seeming true doing that work. But we didn't notice because the belief and the seeming true so often go together. It's only with these interesting cases like Frankie's and Lloyd's that we note that when the belief and the seeming true come apart, and we realise how important that seeming true is to enabling our beliefs to play a role in our decision making. And actually, sometimes there's a benefit to our beliefs not seeming true. So this kind of expands the role that beliefs play. So sometimes it's good for our beliefs, for us to have the beliefs, but for them to not seem true. For example, the beliefs about our own mortality. So our belief about our own mortality, I think, doesn't seem true to us, and I mean, it might lead us to do really very daring things like in the picture here, but generally I think it's a good thing that our belief about our own mortality doesn't seem true, but we still have that belief. So sometimes it's a good thing that there's a benefit to beliefs not seeming true. It allows them to play this other role. Okay, so I haven't talked much about cognitive phenomenology exactly, apart from to say that seeming true is a kind of cognitive phenomenology. But just to let you know, there's this big debate about cognitive phenomenology, and the debate tends to focus on whether cognitive phenomenology is this completely sort of different, distinctive kind of phenomenology, or whether it ultimately collapses into a kind of perceptual phenomenology. And this, I think, this idea can add to that debate. It can kind of expand the debate. So instead of just focusing on what cognitive phenomenology is, we can look at what role it plays. So it initiates a new sort of research program in that, looking at the role of phenomenology in our general everyday decision making and action. And it also offers a move away from the traditional picture, which contrasts our cognitive processes that are involved in deliberation and reasoning with experience and phenomenology. So in the past, it's often been thought that cognition is this like unconscious thing that goes on in the background, and experience is all to do with perceptual phenomenology and experiential. All phenomenology is somehow perceptual in nature or sensory. And it helps to move away from that model. Now this one has a moral dimension to it as well, but another implication of my talk involves looking at our own and others' behaviour and thinking about changing behaviour. So we tend to think that informing people and being informed ourselves will lead to rational, logical and morally correct behaviour. So if we present people with the facts, if we learn the facts ourselves, we'll recycle, give to charity, cut down on air travel and so on. Now if I'm right, then this is mistaken. Presenting people with rational arguments and facts and evidence won't necessarily work, since agents already, for the most part, have the relevant beliefs. The problem isn't that we don't have these beliefs. The problem with our own behaviour and other people's behaviour isn't that we don't have the relevant beliefs, it's just that these beliefs don't seem true, and that's what's preventing them from having an impact in what we decide to do. So changing behaviour, our own and others, requires changing what seems true. And like I say, there's a whole moral ethical dimension to this, which we can talk about in the Q&A perhaps. Okay, so just to summarise, we often fail to make the decisions, judgments, or perform the actions which naturally or rationally or logically follow from our beliefs, desires and character traits. And I've given a couple of case studies to focus on. Now, I've argued that our beliefs have to seem true if they're to play a role in our everyday decision making. This proposal seems, I've suggested, to be more successful than the obvious rivals, so the objections don't seem to work. And it initiates new questions and new approaches for existing research programs, and it suggests that changing behaviour doesn't involve changing beliefs, it depends on changing what seems true. And this may have an impact on other issues in philosophy and social issues and political issues as well. So thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, we do have 20 minutes. I've got, as I said, 13. Maybe I won't go for 7. But I do want to enforce my chair's privileges and just say, one, that the fourth version of the way you look at the problem being when you don't have a belief that does seem true to you has some very, very interesting formulations in Christian scripture. One being, of course, Doubting Thomas, that Ralph and I have decided to put on the poster for your talk. Another being a gospel story about a father who brings a boy to be cured by Jesus, and Jesus tells him that those who believe will, of course, have everything that they want given to them. And the father falls down on his knees and says, "Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief," in the King James version, at least. But rather, they feel powerless completely to do anything about it. Right? They do fully believe it, and it does seem true to them. But they just think no action that they're capable of will have any meaningful impact. And this might be a sort of a background sense rather than, again, an explicit belief. It might be a background sense that there's just nothing that they can contribute to. It's sort of a pessimistic, bleak picture. But you might think we're told, like the dinosaurs, there's a huge comet coming our way, and the only thing that we can do to stop it is for everyone to go out of their homes and stand in their backyards and blow up into the sky to repel it. And you might well think that a lot of people would take a slightly sinister and skeptical attitude to this and decide to stay indoors nonetheless. And maybe COVID could have been explained by that sort of sense. It's far too big for anyone to do anything about it, even if it seems true. And so that might be a fifth objection. And I'll pause here in my 7 points that I want to make for you to answer, and anyone else who might want to jump in. And I'll just the microphone. Ralph will take the microphone around the room. It won't make you any louder, but it will help us record the audio on the video. So do please wait before addressing your question for the microphone to get to you.
Shall I?
Yes.
So yes, I should have. Yes, I think with the last your second point about feeling powerless, I should have said, and I will in the full written version of the paper, that there are going to be some instances of this kind of thing that do have other explanations, potentially. So sometimes there might be instances like that. But I do still think that there's a lot of cases that can't be explained by that. And they're cases where the action... And it might be that the charity one, like, you might think it's just the right thing for me to do, regardless of whether it has a tiny impact or a huge impact. You might think, well, the person should think it's the right thing for them to do, and they should do it, given their beliefs, desires, and character traits, and yet they don't. So, I don't know, maybe, eating meat, like factory farming, that might be an example where you might think... So I would say, like, if we all spent, a few days in like the factory farming industry, probably more of us would become vegans. That's my guess, because I'd say this is another situation where, you believe that horrible things go on, you read about them, you sometimes see articles about them, but somehow it just doesn't seem true that these horrible things are actually going on. Whereas if we immersed ourselves in this industry, they would seem true and we might act differently. That would be my story. And it seems that in this case, you might think, yes, the person might feel powerless to stop factory farming completely, but I think a lot of people who are vegans would be vegans because they just don't want a part in that. So, and people like that might, so my cases would include people like that who would behave, if it did seem true to them, would behave for those reasons. Mm-hmm. And actually otherwise we couldn't explain necessarily the change in behaviour that I predict would happen, because people would still feel powerless. Mm-hmm. Yet I think there would be a change in behaviour if the belief came to seem true. So I guess but thank you, and I should make a proper note of that in there.
I don't really see the difference between a belief and something that seems true. Mm-hmm. So you say, I believe this is a solid table, but it seems true to me from my knowledge of science that it's full of space. On the other hand, you could also say, I believe from my knowledge of science it's full of space, but on the other hand, it seems true to me when I smack it, that it's solid. And so I think what you're talking about is not expressible in that way. I think you should be talking about something I've read about in phenomenology, which is the alteration of validities. And Edmund Husserl describes an experience of his. I think he was in a tailor's shop, And in the corner, he saw a man. So he walked over to this man and tapped him on the shoulder. At that point, he realised, oh, it's not a man, it's a tailor's dummy. So his understanding and his belief at that moment was switching. And I think you can have beliefs that switch in what is in phenomenology, I understand, is called the alteration of validities. And Husserl, in particular, describes that in quite some detail. So I'm going to take issue with you, I'm afraid. But thank you very much. It was a delightful talk.
Thank you very much too. I should read more Husserl. I don't know if I'd be able to, though. I've heard it's very notoriously complicated, the limited amount I know. So I guess, how would that explain? So take the Frankie case. What do you think would be going on there in that case?
Well, she can think about this topic in different ways, and her mind will turn it over, and on one day she'll come to one conclusion, on another day, so that's the alteration of the validity of that for her.
It sounds a bit like, I mean, sorry, it probably isn't to someone who knows about all of this, but it sounds a bit like the in-between belief thing and the half-belief in a way, that you've got different things going on at different times in different contexts. And so I guess my response might be to say, but what about those cases where the conflict is happening right now at this very moment? So the child really does believe that the rug isn't a bear. They really do believe that. And if the rug suddenly jumped up and behaved like a bear, the child would be utterly flabbergasted, I think. So they really do believe that it's just a rug. And yet they really are frightened, in a way. It really does sort of seem true to them that the rug is a bear. So I don't know if case, and admittedly I don't know enough about it, and I'll try to find out more. But I'd say it doesn't necessarily deal as well with the kind of a current simultaneous conflict that I think can happen, potentially. That you can really have the full belief, completely 100%, and yet also have this other thing, which I'm saying is a seeming true or failing to seem true. But thank you, and I will look into it. But thank you.
Thank you for also a fascinating talk. I'd sort of pick up on Mikolai's fifth objection, which I sort of share, of course. So, just thinking of Frankie and Lloyd, and what we know of people that have been interviewed on those kinds of subjects, as to when you believe in charity, why don't you donate, and climate change, why don't you act, blah blah blah. So I think it's for many people it is that they feel powerless, which is a sort of a negative approach. But I think for very many people, as far as we can tell from those kinds of surveys, it's about the absence of a positive feeling that if they do something, it will result in something changing. This may be because they need to have trust in that the actor, the charity to which they are giving, or it may simply mean that they feel that they don't necessarily have that positive feeling. And I just wonder if it relates in part to, when you talk about seeming true, the action of imagination. We have to imagine ourselves as having an impact, and imagination is also part of what seems true and what isn't true. This is like the child with the bare rug. It's the role of imagination which is slightly different to belief, and I just wonder if you could comment on that.
Thank you very much. Yeah. That's nice, actually, because I think this positive feeling that something's going to happen, this is another kind of cognitive phenomenology, in a way. So, in a sense, I'm all for, lots of cognitive phenomenology going on. I think it's we don't think about it enough or admit its existence enough. I guess I would say, again, in many cases that could be the case. But if you take a person like Frankie or Lloyd or anyone else who fits this pattern, where they're not doing what you'd expect them to do given their beliefs and desires and so on, if their behaviour did change as a result of the beliefs coming to seem true, the idea that they feel powerless that the idea that the feeling of powerlessness was what was preventing them from doing it wouldn't explain that. So if Frankie did decide to give money to charity after, I would say, her belief coming to seem true to her, she might still feel powerless in the sense that she might still feel that this is just a drop in the ocean. I don't even know if this money is going to get to the person. But I still think she would change her behaviour. And so if powerlessness, the feeling of powerlessness was really the reason, we wouldn't expect people's behaviour to change, I think, in those situations.
But does the behaviour change? I mean, that's
I don't know. Like when you're giving a philosophy talk, you can often make these predictions. And someone will say, but where's the empirical evidence? You're like, well, I don't know, I expect that probably it would. So yeah, I should look. And I do think actually that when you're in your ordinary everyday life, that belief of Frankie's, if she was in a different environment and what can come to seem true, it could quickly go away again. It has to stay seeming true to keep that new behaviour going. So I think, I should try and defend that empirically. But thank you so much, and yeah, like I said, I should look more at that.
Thank you for your talk. I want to raise an example from the life of Albert Speer, who was very powerful in Hitler's Germany. And there's a true story. Someone comes into his office one day and says, Albert, you will not believe what's happening in the concentration camps. And Albert says, I cannot know this. I cannot know this. Is this an issue of cognition or an issue of will? Or to put it another way, from your earlier comment, you said you weren't considering it acrasia, but why not? Is that because you don't want to look at it, or is it because it's not important to your case? Surely there are cases when will matters, like the Albert Speer. Thank you.
That's excellent. We know, maybe subconsciously through sort of our witnessing our own behaviour in the world, that we do tend to do the things that seem true to us. That when things seem true, they do impact on our behaviour more than when things that don't seem true. There's lots of, like people could not believe in free will, but it doesn't seem true to them that they've got no free will. They just carry on in their lives making decisions just the same. So it could be that this is an example of someone who knows in a way that if that belief was to come to seem true to them, if they were faced with the awful truth, they'd be compelled to act on it. And so in a way, it's a kind of subconscious acknowledgement that this picture is true, that whilst it's just maybe just a belief, I know the idea is that they can't know it, but as long as it doesn't get to the seeming true, we kind of cannot act on it. We can allow ourselves not to act on it. Whereas we know, that's probably why we don't all go and look in the windows of abattoirs. You kind of know, don't you, that if you did that, you probably would have to change your behaviour afterwards. I don't know. That seems true for me. So in a way, it might be that sometimes we kind of have this idea that we will have to change our behaviour once things seem true. But thank you so much. That was a really helpful.
Okay, two things that equally seem true but can be contradictory. So for example, if, Frankie thinks that charity being good and necessary for, alleviation of pain in the world, and she was able to acquire this via perception and experience, but she also was able to acquire a seeming true that people in poverty in those conditions will be alleviated by, participating in some government jobs or activism in a way that the government is able to sort of provide the means to alleviate the poverty. And she has the actual seeming true aspect of experiences and perception to corroborate this seeming true. So when there are two seemingly contradictory or incommensurability of beliefs, belief one or two, or seeming true one and seeming two, and then she decides that within a hierarchy of seeming true, that the one in which the government actually providing the assistance is, more seeming true, and then the charity is less seeming true, could you still say that she still believes, or she still thinks that charity seems true to her, but that has been sort of cancelled or outweighed by another seeming true? So that was my first question. And the second one had to do with a salience aspect, in that you talked about the example of COVID, and that for these people, it's not a matter of salience because it's all over the news, it's all over the world, so there's no way that it can't not be salient. But it could be all over the news. There could be empirical data, in fact, all over the news, yet it could not be salient to them. So Thomas Nagel, for example, distinguishes like there is the objective and subjective drift, and that happens because the subjective perspective cannot fit into the objective. And it seems like in those cases of salience is that objectively it's salient in the world, but one's subjective knowing of it still doesn't follow through. So in that case, wouldn't that be a matter of sort of cultivating a certain emotional disposition to register on a subjective level that what's happening in objective world also is sort of corroborate or responding to one's subjective perception and recognition of it? So I was thinking about it in terms of desires, values, and emotions as also a way of helping one recognize that something seems true for them. So those are my two questions.
I mean, I guess I could say then we get degrees. So something can seem really true to you, or very strong seeming true phenomenology, and something is less seeming. It seems true in a kind of more diminished sense. But I'm just going to have to say I'll have to think more about that case and try and think of this. Try and come up with an example of an actual, a real conflict where you've got two things that seem true conflicting with each other. The Nagel and the subjective and objective, again, I'm going to have to think more about it. I'm not sure if the term salience is actually, flexible enough to be split in that way, really. So I'm not sure if things could be like of course things could be objectively salient, if we define salience as what's being reported the most or something. But I think I'm using a notion of salience where it is automatically salience to a subject, so salience to the person involved. And I would say that surely that belief, because it is being objectively reported so much, that belief would be salient to them in that kind of sense. But again, I'll think more to see whether there could be that distinction, and that something could be sort of salient in one way, but not salient in another way. That's interesting and helpful, so thank you.
I think of Newman's distinction between notional and real assent, where you just sort of believe something in your head and where somehow you've taken on the whole baggage. Nietzsche is the same as Newman on this. We all believe what Kant and science has told us, but we haven't really taken on the full weight of consequences. I don't think that's just logical consequences somehow or other. It's a deeper psychological taking it in. And the other kind of point is I can't believe, and my wife can't believe, that I'm 77. And it's not because I don't look it. It's not because I don't look it. It's because it's never happened before. So if you'd said to me 40 years ago, how old will you be in 40 years? I said, well, if I'm not dead, I'll be 77. So it's not surprising. And it's something I live with all the time because I'm always thinking about it. But it seems difficult to believe that it's really the case. Now, those seem to be very different cases. I'm not sure whether perhaps yours is a portmanteau term, not meant to be one sort of way where there's this distinction, but I just wondered what you thought about them.
Thank you. And yes, that belief doesn't seem true to me at all either, Howard. I can't believe it. I'm saying that the person believes it. Completely, 100%, totally believes these things, and the flexibility comes about through whether it seems true to them or not. Are you saying that I should allow more flexibility in the notion of belief than I'm doing so far? So a kind of alternative to the Schwitzgebel and Price view that there's a half belief, it might be something else, that the notion of belief is itself more flexible than I'm allowing, and that you can that there's a sense in which you can not believe it and believe it at the same time.
I'd just like to thank the sponsors of this series yet again. First of all, our hosts this evening, Blackfriars Hall at the University of Oxford. Secondly, of course, the Ian Ramsey Centre at the Theology and Religion faculty here at Oxford, and the Faculty of Philosophy at the University of Warsaw, my alma mater, two proud sponsors of the Humane Philosophy Project. But most of all, I'd like to thank our speaker this evening, Laura Gow. So please join me in thanking her yet again for a fantastic evening.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.